Good evening, I'll sit down. Welcome to 7 p.m. Live. This is Bingo.
Hiya.
Before I hand over to you, Bingo, I can't remember, I don't think everybody has been, or you might not have been for a while. So, format of the night, I'm going to open with a little short prayer, hand over to Bingo. Bingo's going to share their story. Then we'll pause, we'll play some music again, get another cuppa, get some more biscuits, sit and have a chat around your tables about what Bingo's shared with us. And hopefully in that conversation, you'll be thinking, oh, I'd really like to ask this question. Oh, I wonder about this. And even if, as you go along, would it be okay, Bingo, if they got the phone out and wrote a note for themselves?
Yeah, that's fine.
We wouldn't think you're checking something else on Facebook.
No, I was just saying to this table over here that I have no attention span whatsoever. So anything that you need to fiddle with, anything that you need to distract
within
yourself
reason.
With, yes, yeah. Within reason. Anything that would be appropriate.
Let's have clear boundaries from the start.
Yeah, feel free, because if I was sat there, I'd be messing about and looking at my phone and stuff like that. So that's fine.
My wife crochets sometimes in the middle of things. Sometimes it's meetings, sometimes it's services. We were at Pizza Hut and she just got it out after we finished eating. And I was like, well, where have you had that? She just started. Oh, I don't think they would be able to compete with knitting at the cinema. You can't get it from Pick and Mix, so you might be safe, mightn't you? But yeah. Anyway, that's the rough format of the evening. So I always forget at the end to tell you who's coming next week. Would someone be really kind and remind me? Anyone? Just remind me at the end so I can tell you a little bit about next week. And we are recording this story bit, but we're not going to record the question bit at the end. Okay, so if I just say a little prayer. Father God, we thank you that we've been able to meet together tonight, and we thank you that you've brought Bingo to us. And we know that we wanted to have Bingo earlier in the year, but things didn't quite work out. And so, Father, we thank you that they're here tonight. And we just ask that you would help us to listen and help us to just start getting a hold of what you want us to take home from this tonight. So, Lord, speak through Bingo, speak to us and help us to listen. Amen. Over to you.
Lovely. Well, thank you so much for welcoming me and having me here. I was just saying as well that I arrived in Liverpool 2 weeks before lockdown, and so I'm only just starting to find my way around and get out and about and meet people. So it's lovely to be here and lovely to visit your church. As Tom said, I am Reverend Bingo Allison. And I wrote this all down because it's all a bit of a list. So I'm an autistic, non-binary, genderqueer person, and my pronouns are they, them. Now what that means, I'll go into that hopefully when we get to the questions, because it's a lot easier for me to answer questions about that than it is for me to rattle off a big spiel. But for now, all you need to know is if you're going to talk about me afterwards, you have to say nice things. That's the first thing. But you might you need to refer to me like this. So you might say, I heard an excellent talk by Reverend Bingo the other day. They are non-binary and their pronouns are they, them. I would really like to hear more from them. That's it. That's all. So I'm not a he and I'm not a she. I am a they and I am a them.
And I do apologise for my slip up before.
Oh, don't worry about it. As I say as well, I won't get horrendously offended if you slip up, or it's the same when you meet someone for the first time and you get their name mixed up and all that kind of stuff. It's no bother. But yeah, and it's something that we do all the time. If I said to you, I don't know, the shop assistant was really rude to me the other day, and you might say, oh, what did they say? And you'd be using they, them pronouns without even thinking about it. But it just helps me because, I'm not a man and I'm not a woman. I'm something else. Another important thing to know about me is that I have really shaky hands. And so you might be sat there thinking, oh my gosh, that Reverend Bingo is looking really nervous. And I'm a bit nervous, but even on my good days, this is as shaky as
I'll do a comparison.
There we go. So that's me, very shaky hands. It just runs in my family, I'm afraid. It missed my mum's generation, but it hit me, and yeah, I just have shaky hands. So I'm not having a panic attack up here yet.
If you do, please let us know.
Excellent.
If you're able.
And finally, you need to know that I am from Yorkshire. And because I'm from Yorkshire, I love stories. But the thing about Yorkshire is that we never tell one story at once. We go off in different directions, and we normally tell 2 stories at once at least. So, I'm going to do that today. I'm going to tell you one story that's mine, and one that's from the Bible, and belongs to all of us, and I'm going to mix and match, and hopefully they might start talking to each other. But I can't just tell one story. I'm sorry, I just have to do it. And also, I'm going to move around a bit because I'm a fidget. So that's the other thing. So I'm going to tell you a story from the Bible, and it's from John 8. It's really sneaky, actually. Can I tell you a secret? It's not in a lot of the early copies of the Bible. It was snuck in late. And it's a story that people just decided was so Jesus-y that it had to be in. And so they just sort of shoved it into John's Gospel. But at one point it was in Matthew's Gospel, at one point it was in John's Gospel. Nobody quite agrees where it should go. But it's a bit like me. It's an odd one that's stuck in. But I'm going to tell you this story, and it begins with a group of people like you sat around listening to a person like me. So the first thing I want you to think yourself into is a crowd of people who've come to listen to Jesus in the synagogue. Now, the synagogue is like the church or the teaching place, and you would all be sat on the floor, and Jesus would be sat on the floor, and that would be how you would hear each other. There was none of this standing up, walking around. It was sat on the floor. So the first part of the story is the crowd, and the crowd were there to listen to Jesus, and Jesus was sat on the floor, and they were sat on the floor. So that's the first bit of my first story. My other story is mine, which is that I grew up the eldest of 3 children. You can tell I'm the eldest because I'm the most extra. I'm always the most loud and the most flamboyant. It's always been the case. But my dad my dad's a vicar as well, and my granddad was a vicar until he sadly died this year. But it runs in the family. It's a bit of a curse, but a blessing, obviously. But my dad's really conservative. He went to this super conservative training college where they taught him how to be proper Protestant, upstanding kind of citizen. And my mum is similarly conservative, and she's a teacher. And when I was born, they decided that I was a boy. And that was the gender I was assigned at birth. And I don't blame my parents or anyone else for thinking that. They were following the best evidence that they had at hand, but it just happened that they were incorrect. And for the most part, I had a lovely childhood. I had some great friends and loving parents, and everything was easy. I wasn't a particularly effeminate child. I know it's hard to believe now, but, you know, I liked playing Legos and cars and all the things a little boy's supposed to enjoy. And, you know, and I didn't come across very autistic early on either. I was very, very bright and very good at masking my autism, and so I could think of ways of basically pretending to be normal. And so that didn't really appear in my childhood. But things changed for me when I entered my teenage years, and my body started to change. And the difference between my body and the body of my female friends started to become more pronounced. And I felt more and more distant from them. And I used to fantasize about having a different body, one I could step into when I dreamed. And I used to write stories with female protagonists who seemed a lot like me. When I played video games, if I could choose the female character, I always chose the female character to play in the video game. And I got really into clothes and fashion, but I was only really ever interested in going shopping with my girlfriends and helping them pick out outfits and things. So I tried to distance myself from more boy things like football and that kind of thing. I just sort of, you know, that wasn't for me. And things were also changing for me at school. I was finding it was more and more difficult to pretend not to be autistic. I was disorganized and forgetful and easily distracted and just plain weird in the way that I thought and understood things. I got really obsessed over particular things, and I would talk about them. I also struggled picking up on social cues and communicating with my voice and with my facial expressions. But I had a small group of friends who were a bit weird like me. And generally, they were the ones that helped me get through my school days, which were a bit of a mess of kind of all this anxiety and worry about fitting in and hiding who I was, and it was really difficult. Going back to our first story, so we've got our crowd gathered around Jesus. They wouldn't be nicely spaced out like this, by the way. They'd be right up close. And along come this group of religious leaders, Pharisees. So I want you to put your head into these Pharisees. They've had this guy coming in and causing trouble every day. He's coming in and telling tales, telling stories, and teaching things that they don't really... He seems very odd in the way he thinks. He doesn't think like them. He doesn't follow the rules. He's got a bit of a odd way about him, and they're a bit worried about him, and they're a bit worried that and so they decide to test him. Because you've got to test people, haven't you? You know, if they're a bit dodgy, you've got to give them a bit of a test. Now, this is where you might struggle to put your head into these Pharisees, because what do? They go and find the nearest naked woman and bring the naked woman to Jesus. So you've got these Pharisees stood up over here. Pharisees stood up over here. Naked woman stood up over here. Jesus sat on the floor down here, talking. And he looks up, sees Pharisees, sees naked woman. And the Pharisee says, "We've just caught this woman with someone she shouldn't be with." Now, There's very particular rules about this kind of test. The rule is that you've got to bring both parties. So they've broken the rules already. And you're also meant to give her time to put her clothes on, for heaven's sake. But the Pharisees, you've thought to yourself, we'll give him the proper test. We'll have him sat on the floor, us stood up with this naked woman. He'll be embarrassed, he'll be flustered, we'll catch him out. Because if we catch him out, then everyone will see how weird he is. Everyone will see how odd he is. He'll stand out. That's with us, with the Pharisees. And back to me. I did say I've got no attention span. I do have to keep jumping about. So we've talked about school. We've talked about childhood. Now we need to talk about church. My church was a proper Yorkshire village church. Friendly and welcoming to a fault. Involved in every single aspect of people's lives. We had the gala. We had the... what's it called? The Flower Festival. We had the May Queen. We had, the Easter. We had these weird called pace egg plays. Have you heard of them? It's like an Easter play. Anyway, we had those. Everything that the village did was the church was involved, and I could get away with nothing in this village. I tell you. Once I went into the pharmacy to buy some throat sweets, and 2 hours later, someone went up to my dad and asked him how my sore throat was. My mum always said we should have gone in and bought a pregnancy test. But they were friendly and they were lovely and they were welcoming to a point. But it was hard knowing in my heart how different I was, because I knew that if they knew how different I was, things would be different. Everything was friendly and welcoming, but there were things that you didn't talk about. Anyone who looked or dressed differently was laughed at. It was hard to really imagine being myself, being my autistic self, being whatever the heck was happening with my gender, because I had no idea at the time. But it was difficult. Even in the youth group, I was in a youth group, and it was great because it was one of the few mixed gender spaces where it was socially acceptable to hang out with girls. I don't think a lot of churches realise that, but it's one of the few places where it's kind of the done thing that there's girls and boys hanging out together and actually talking to each other, God forbid. And because of all this, faith was difficult as well, because faith was so important to me. I knew that I loved God and that what I felt when I prayed and I worshiped was real and important. I knew that when I read the Bible, I felt close to God and that I needed my church to help me to grow and enrich my faith. But I always would come to this barrier. And it was a barrier in me, and it was a barrier between me and them. I could look all around me in my church and in the Bible, but I could never see anyone like me. Because everybody in the Bible, totally, everybody, there's no autistic people in the Bible. I know. This is what I was told. This was how the Bible was presented to me. This was how church was presented to me. We don't talk about that. It's not in the Bible. It's not there. No autistic people. No people who wanted to dress differently, who wanted to live differently. No people who were assigned a male gender at birth who wanted to live something different. And I wasn't given the tools or encouragement to find any of that stuff out. We weren't really encouraged to see ourselves in the stories of the Bible like we're trying to do today with our Pharisees and our crowd. It didn't feel like the Bible was written for people like me. And it didn't feel like the welcome my church gave was for people like me. And so it didn't feel like the love that God offered in Jesus was for people like me. And then, in my late teens and early 20s, I got involved in an even more conservative church that made me feel even more out of place. It was a bit like a cult now I look back on it. I think I was running into something more certain. And so I found this church that was certain about everything. They knew everything about everything, and it was certain. And it was all black and white, and it was easy. But my autism was treated as a problem to be fixed. Something that if we prayed hard enough, I could be healed. Even if, actually, sometimes I quite like being autistic. It's kind of fun, you know. I've got a bit of a different way of thinking about things, and a different sense of humour, and a different, you know, it's kind of fun being different. I wasn't sure I wanted to be healed, but that was what they told me. I was told that God could make me normal if I believed hard enough. And because I wasn't normal, I wasn't believing hard enough. I was basically taught what I'd always thought growing up in that village in Yorkshire, that the Bible and the church community wasn't for people like me. Men and women were given different messages about their place in the community and their roles in society. And anyone who stepped outside of that was made to feel ashamed and ostracized. So I pushed all of it really deep down. I put on layer after layer of masks so that I could fit in. I hid my autism because I didn't want to be prayed for. I hid the questions that I had about my gender because I knew the shame that would bring. But I don't want you to think that every single day in church was miserable, because it wasn't. I was still able to find joy in church and in the Bible. I still could feel that I could feel a connection to God there, even though it was through all these barriers and through all these masks. So I settled on the idea that even if I could never feel at home in my church community, I could help to make sure that other people did. It's a common thing among people. You might hear it. They kind of, oh, well, everybody else is forgiven, just not me. Everyone else is all right, just not me. Everyone else is accepted, just not me. It's something we pick up on ourselves. And so I thought I could help other people. And so I started to feel a call to ministry in the Church of England. And I volunteered as much as I could in different churches. And eventually I was encouraged to enter the selection process for ordination. And amazingly enough as well, I met this fantastic woman who is now my wife. And I think I saw in her someone else who felt on the edge, but who wanted to help others feel less isolated. And we fell in love, and we got married far too young. It'll never last. That's what my granny told me when I married at 21. You're far too young, it'll never last. But we're doing all right, 14 years on. But yes, so that was my initial experience. But let's go back, because we've got the crowd, and we've got Pharisees, and then we've got Jesus on the floor. And these Pharisees come here with this naked woman. And Jesus has got this scarf over his head, which you wear to preach. And instead of looking up at the naked woman, looking up at these leaders, he bends right down and he begins to draw in the sand. Now, lots of people, clever people, spend enormous amounts of time saying, what did he write in the sand? Do you have a theory, Tom?
I don't know.
Do you know, as an autistic person, I love stimming, which is just like doing repetitive things. So for me, when Jesus bends down, he's just doing repetitive things because it's all a bit overwhelming and it's all a bit too much. And he bends down and he takes himself out of this situation and focuses in, and he's ready. So that's when I think myself into Jesus, I think myself into this autistic person, feeling the ground, not feeling that, not dealing with that. I just need time. So that's what Jesus does. In my mid-20s, I started to discover that there were other disabled and neurodivergent Christians who felt on the edge by church communities. I was introduced to Inclusive Church, which is this lovely organisation that, among other things, fights for inclusion of disabled and people like me and neurodivergent people like me. And I went to my first Inclusive Church Disability Conference, a chance for disabled people to get together from all around the country and share their experiences. And this was the first time I'd ever been in a church context where I felt comfortable not hiding who I was. And I started doing that. This is my favourite stim. So I started doing this in the middle of worship, and I could do it, and no one looked at me, and no one made a big fuss, and I could just sit and do that, and it was fine. And that was just amazing. And this was the first time I'd ever been honest about the things that made it hard for me to access church. And I found people who encouraged me to look for people in the Bible who thought like me and who could give me tools to look. I learned to look at Jesus on the cross and see a God who knew just what it was like to suffer and be judged. I learned about Nicodemus, this brilliant man who has a very, very autistic brain, because when Jesus says you're going to be reborn, he says, how am I going to get back inside my mother? That's a classic autistic literal brain thing there. So I started to understand that part of my calling to the church was to create more inclusion, to help disabled people and neurodivergent people feel like they could have a home and they could have something real. So we've done the crowd, and we've done the Pharisees, and we've done Jesus, and we've got the woman stood, shivering, naked. We've no idea, by the way, whether or not she was caught in adultery. We've no idea whether she was doing anything that she shouldn't have done. All we know is that the Pharisees present this random naked woman and say she's been doing wrong. What's it feel like? Hundreds of people in the middle of church, naked, desperately trying to cover yourself. Feeling that, feeling every eye on you, apart from this one man here. Every eye on you, apart from this one here. And he just ignores everyone. And they're trying to get him to tell you where to go. And he doesn't. He doesn't look at you. He doesn't go up at you. You're not different. You're not odd. You're not out of place. He's just there. And bit by bit, everyone starts to leave. The crowd start to go. The Pharisees start to go. And all that you're left with is you and him. And he looks up at you. And he says, where have they all gone? And you say, well, they've gone. He says, what, weren't they going to condemn you? You say, no. They should say, yeah, they were going to condemn me, but they've gone. And he says, well, I don't condemn you either. Inclusive Church doesn't just fight for disability inclusion. It also fights for inclusion for LGBT people. And the more I got involved with them, the harder it was to ignore. I was sat across the table from this amazing transgender priest called Rachel Mann, and I was saying, well, I don't really know how I feel about the gay marriage issue. And she nearly reached across the table and clocked me one, and says, this is not an issue, these are people. And that just, got me. And things like that. And in the meantime, there were times when I deep down asked myself in my most silent moments whether I was transgender. I'd seen these transgender people around, and I knew deep down the answer to the question, are you a man, was no. But the answer to the question that followed was, are you a woman? And that was no as well. And everyone around me, my family, my church, my society, all told me that transgender people were a joke, they were dangerous, they were suspicious, they were wrong. And so I would close the door on that question of my gender and move on. But then I watched a documentary on Channel 4, as you do, and it was about a genderqueer, non-binary person, the first time I'd ever heard that word. And it was like that bit in the Bible where someone meets Jesus and they said, he knew everything about me. It was like this word knew everything about me. And it felt like a huge release. I felt like I could suddenly answer all these questions. But it was terrifying. I didn't tell a single soul for months. But by this point, I was at theology college training to be a vicar. The community there is so varied that you're constantly challenging each other's assumptions. You're constantly talking late into the night over coffee and wine and goodness knows what. And you had to find ways to get on together without condemning each other, because otherwise you just end up killing each other. And then this one day, I had this essay on the creation stories. Right at the very beginning of the Bible. And I remember how I felt while I was writing it. I hadn't really expected to meet God writing an essay. Who does, really? But yeah. And I wrote this essay, and I suddenly felt like God just went, like just slammed down from above. And all the tools that I'd got from learning about disability and reading the Bible suddenly clicked into place with reading this creation narrative. And this amazing bit, Genesis 1:27, which says, male and female, he created them. And I fixated right on this and I kept coming back to this and I thought I better look up what this and really means. And I looked at this and it's like, it's not and, it's kind of two. So it's like from maleness to femaleness, he created them. And I knew then that I could live in this and. I could live in this middle ground, and I could live in this place where God accepted me and created me right from the beginning. And I felt God moving through me and guiding me through all the texts that I read. And I had to stop and pray every 20 minutes, 200 words, then I stopped and I had to have a quick pray and a bit of a shout at God, and then I carried on going. And from then on, I knew that God loved me. I was God's beloved non-binary child, that they had created me for change and transformation, just like everybody is created for change and transformation, and that God would walk with me every step of the way. And it's been a hard journey since then. Being different in church and community is still difficult. I've faced many people, churches and organisations who see me as a problem to be fixed, who claim to be welcoming but only to those who fit, who would try to keep the Bible in the hands of those whom they believe to be worthy, who try to stop those of us who are different from seeking our own experience in the story of Jesus. But I will continue to stand up for a church community that does not seek to condemn people like me, but rather to listen to and celebrate them, to open up doors and pages for them to be truly at home exactly as they are. No condemnation, a true community of love and grace.
Bingo, thank you so much for sharing your story tonight. There were